Okay, so we're good to get going?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us virtually for an exciting author talk all about New York sports teams. We do have the book here in the library in the news section. I didn't have time to grab it now, but it is there. And it's so shiny and new, so please check it out. Um, right there.
There
Uh,
it is.
and we are welcomed to host Todd Ehrlich, who is the founder and t president of TV Line television company. He is a five-time Emmy Award winner and 22-time Emmy nominee during his 40 years in the business. And he's worked at a number of sports televisions at WABC, WNBC, WCBS, and CBS Sports. Just some highlights. He's originally from Washington, D.C., and he now currently lives here in North Bergen. And we're also joined by Guttenberg resident David Jurman, who will be doing the interview portion of the night. So I will pass it over to David, and if anybody has any questions, just drop them in the chat, and then I will do my best to flag people down as we go along.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much. And thank you, Chelsea, as well, at the North Bergen Public Library. We truly appreciate having us here tonight for this author talk. And Todd, thank you so much for giving your time as well, too. So let's start off with if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself. Besides being an author, you have an extensive background in the field of television.
Yeah, and having a background in TV allowed me to write this book and write the book that I wanted to write. I was hoping not only to share the 20 greatest moments in New York sports history, but to share stories that people have never heard before and share it in a unique way. Um, at WCBS, I was not only a producer and an executive producer, but I also booked the shows. I also went out and field produced. So I was lucky enough to get to know a tremendous amount of athletes from the New York area very, very well. And I had their respect by the way in which I conducted myself. I always asked tough questions, but fair questions, booked them on our shows, always made them look good, always prepared them. But again, we asked the tough questions. Um, and I had all of their numbers. I also created a show called Sports from the Round Table, which was a roundtable sports program on WCBS where we had media personalities. So from being in press boxes for 30, 40 years to being in the field covering games and covering locker rooms during the week to having these guys on my shows, I had a pretty extensive Rolodex and a really nice rapport with a lot of these athletes, broadcasters, and writers. And it allowed them to open up and trust me. And the favorite thing I heard when I was doing interviews for this book was, Todd, I'm going to tell you something I haven't told anybody else before. And so I think the reader is the beneficiary of that.
Now, you mentioned a lot of work you've done in TV and with local stations as well. I mean, New York has had an amazing amount of great local broadcasters: Bill Mazer, Scott Clark, Warner Wolf. I can go on and on. Are there any names that you worked with specifically that we might know that you could mention?
Yeah, I mean, sure. So I worked with Warner, and I actually knew him from DC. He danced with my mom at a wedding once, which is very nice. And I worked with him at WCBS. Scotty, I produced at WABC TV along with Corey McFerrin. Then at WCBS, I worked very closely with Otis Livingston um, and with Obi-Wan Kenobi, Steve, who's a great guy as well. Then at WNBC, I did The Voice of the Athlete with Len Berman, which was a look at how the sports world dealt with 9/11. I was very proud of that show. And then at WPIX, I worked with, well, I hired Mark Malusis, the Moose. I hired Figgy, Nelson Figueroa, who's a former Met. I work closely with Joe Masseri and Justin Walters as well. So I've been, exceedingly lucky. Also, when I was at Sports Channel America, I worked with Ed, and he obviously did Talking Baseball for years on the Fan and has a show on Sirius XM Radio. Remember when? So I've just been really, really blessed to work with what I think is the creme de la creme in local broadcasting. And then I ran the Emmy division at CBS Sports. So Jim Nantz was nice enough to give me his time and perspective for the book. I just hosted an event with Phil Simms, who obviously was one of the great moments, and Boomer Esiason. So I just, you just have to sort of pinch yourself when you look back and somebody as nice as you, David, asks us about my career, and you take a look at it and you're just, just beyond blessed, beyond grateful, beyond lucky, and hard work really does pay off.
Well, that's a real who's who of people we've worked with. Really, really impressive. So let's get into the book. You write that it was over 2 decades from concept to being published.
Yeah, I'm
Can
an
you talk
overnight
about that?
sensation, David.
I'm
Just
sorry.
overnight. I'm an overnight sensation, David.
How did the idea, when did the idea come to you to write this book?
Okay, so I'm producing Sports from the Round Table around 2003 for WCBS. Steve Serby, who's a good friend of mine, wrote a book with Lawrence Taylor. We went out, we covered a book signing, which now that I've had a lot of book signings, it's a very nice thing we did. At the time, I was looking to get Serby and LT, and it was the way to get them, but it's really meaningful when somebody comes out and supports you because writing a book is hard, and I appreciate you reaching out to me to support me. So we interview LT, and he said, we asked him because he was very open in the book with Serby about, the drugs that he did. And he goes, maybe the drugs are what made me play so well, And I thought that was an interesting soundbite. And Phil Mushnick actually wrote about it in the post. So it was a little bit of a get for us. But in reading Serby's book, he had a unique style where he had little chunks of interviews. And one thing I'm good at is interviewing people. David, I really think this would be a lot better if we switch places. I'm just telling you, I'll do the best I can on this side of being interviewed, but I'm much better at where you're sitting at eliciting good answers and doing a good job at being an interviewer. But so I looked at it and I said, wow, I'm actually good at that. And my grandfather had written more than 20 books. My mom had written 15 books. My sister-in-law had written a book. And so it was always in the back of my mind, on the bucket list, I would like to write a book. I'd been lucky enough to, be on the radio and host some shows on ESPN radio. And I hosted a podcast and I wrote some articles that were published, and I created sports shows and sports series, and I produced sports documentaries that won some awards. And so on the bucket list was a book, but I'm not my mom. I'm not a Ford Scholar. I'm not my grandfather. My grandfather collected chairs at universities like he was trying to fill his dining room and make a dining room set. And so these people are all brilliant. I was always a little bit more charming than brilliant, to be honest with you, but I work hard. And so when I saw that, I said, wow, you know what? Maybe I could write a book that's more interview focused. And then I thought to myself, well, what the heck am I going to write about? And it dawned on me that of the 20 greatest moments in New York sports history, I knew a lot of these heroes. Like I had their numbers in my Rolodex. I had them in my cell phone. I had personal relationships. And so I thought to myself, okay, but who the heck is going to, give me a book deal? I'm a TV producer, right? So I go, why don't I partner with the New York Times best-selling author? This would only help. So I said,
Mhm.
Serbs. I got an idea. He's like, great. We had lunch on the Upper East Side with his agent. His agent loved the idea, couldn't sell it. 2 decades later, Elliot Kalb, you guys might know as Mr. Stat from NBC Sports, called
Mhm.
me up, and we had worked together at WABC and said, Ehrlich, they cut back at MLB Productions. I'm looking for work. Can you help me? And I believe in karma. I don't believe karma is direct. I don't believe if I help Elliot, he's going to help me. But I think if you do the right thing in life and you help everybody you can, then what happens is somebody else will help you. Either way, I took the call. I had lunch with him, and I said, "So what have you been doing?" He goes, "Oh, well, I wrote these books." I said, "You did what? You wrote books?" I said, "Done. Now I know what we can work on together." I go, "I got a 30-page proposal that I believe in. I think it's great. All we have to do is lick a stamp, which you don't have to do anymore, but send an email to a
Yep.
publisher." He knew somebody at Skyhorse. I did the sale since it was, my concept. They bought the book. Elliot got hired by Bob Costas to work on the MLB Network Game of the Week. Well, he couldn't turn that down. How do you turn down Bob Costas? You don't. Nobody in their right mind would. I certainly wouldn't. And so he wanted to dedicate his time and resources to doing the best job he could with that. So I took over the book and I said, I still would sort of like somebody that people, when they walk into Barnes and Noble, although had I had any idea how hard it was to get into Barnes and Noble, I wouldn't have had that thought. But when they walk into Barnes and Noble, they see Todd Ehrlich. Who? Gary Myers. Gary Myers. You mean the Gary Myers of the Daily News? The Hall of Fame nominated Gary Myers, the guy that broke story year after year after year, who covered every Super Bowl. That Gary Myers, this guy I know. This guy knows New York sports. He's a guy I've been putting on TV for 20 years at CBS and then again at Pix 11. And I said, Gary, I'm almost done with the book. I need someone to write 5 of the pre-games. Could you help me out? I'll do all of the interviews. I'll write the other 15. I'll do all the time capsules, and we can talk about how the book is constructed next. Um, if you'll help me out with that. And next thing you know, I've got a New York Times best-selling author and a friend on the cover of my book. I mean, it's in my mind, pretty smart marketing.
Absolutely. Now, the book starts in the year 1960.
Yeah,
And I think it's important for our viewers to know why 1960 was important. That was the year that really sports expansion of the league started. So in 1960, the American Football League started, which merged in 1970 with the National Football League. Major League Baseball expands in 1962. Up until that point, it was only 8 teams per league.
yeah,
1967, you have the formation of the American Basketball Association, with 4 of those franchises in the National Basketball Association. And even fast forward into 1972, and the World Hockey Association is formed, all competing leagues with the established league, the world established leagues. The World Hockey Association comes in. 4 of those franchises eventually absorbed into the NHL. So it's kind of a good dividing line in terms of traditional historic sports and sports as we know it now to the present day. Why did you choose to start with 1960, considering there is a rich tradition of Yankee championships going back to 1923, the Giants of 1956, and other great championship teams?
well, I'm going to choose to have you answer this question next time I'm interviewed on WFAN or ESPN Radio or SNY or for the Post or Daily News, all of which of which covered my book, and it was very gracious of all of them to help me out and do that. It's gracious of you to have me on, but I like your answer better than mine. My answer is I didn't want to write about the cold shot when I have no idea whether he was pointing to where he was going to hit the baseball, whether he was pointing at a fan that was screaming, whether he was just trying to stretch. I don't know, and I can't interview Babe Ruth. I also didn't want to pretend that I was there for DiMaggio's hit streak. I wasn't. I wasn't alive. I can't feel the importance of it. So I wrote as a tagline to the title of the book, which is a paragraph or two. Our generation of memories from 1960 to today, our generation of memories. I wanted to write about not only what I knew, but I wanted to write about events that I could have people that covered them, that played in them, and that knew them. And I could add insight, I could add compelling stories to it, and I could bring whatever level of expertise from working in the New York market, creating a bunch of shows. Um, like you said, winning 5 Emmys, having 20 Emmy nominations, um, whatever level of expertise that I could bring, I wanted to bring, and I wanted this book to be insightful. I didn't want this book to be stuff that I had heard. Um, I wanted it to be tangible, and I also wrote it, which we can get to later, but I wrote it for families to share. And so I have a 7-year-old son, Jagger David Ehrlich, greatest kid in the history of the planet Earth. Apologies to anyone else that reproduced, but facts are facts. It's just the truth. He is a wonderful, smart, funny, engaging, fantastic son, just a wonderful son. And I wanted to be able to share. He's growing up in New York. When I grew up, a lot of street credibility came from knowing sports. So when somebody got injured, being able to call up Willis Reed, when somebody made a guarantee, being able to talk about Namath and Messi, when somebody had a historic World Series game to go, not bad, but not Reggie, who had 3 home runs in 3 pitches. You bring that kind of knowledge to the playground, you got street cred. And also, I wanted families to be able to bond over sports. My father and I spoke to my father today about the Thursday night football game. His thoughts, he was going to watch it, the imports, the fact that it's the first time that DC has had a big regular season game since Kirk Cousins beat Philly to win the division at 7-9, or RG3 beat Dallas in 2012 to win that division. It had been over a decade since they had a big regular season game outside of those two. So it's my relationship with my father, my going to Super Bowls with my dad. My dad had a thing called a lap pass, where if a father could carry his son in, the son went in for free, and you had to sit on your father's lap. He made me sit in the aisle. Different topic, different day. We get back to that, but he got me into the game, and we have that bond, and we still text during games. Well, I wanted to have that bond with my son, and I thought this book would be a way to do that. I wanted other fathers to have that bond with their sons. I wanted other mothers to have that bond with their daughters. I wanted grandparents to be able to talk to their grandsons. I wanted families to read one chapter at a time and discuss it at the dinner table. And then when something comes up that's relatable to that moment, I wanted them to go, "Oh, yeah, do you remember that book we read and blah, 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 and Joe Namath said, or David Tyree said, or Phil McConkey said, and this is just like that." So, it's my gift. If it's utilized in that way, and however anybody reads it and however they use it, thank you for buying it. Thank you for reading it from the bottom of my heart, because I worked hard on it. It means a lot. But that was one of my goals.
The book is incredibly well researched, and you did over 100 interviews, which is really staggering. Can you talk about those interviews, that process? Were there favorite interviews that you had? Just the overall process in terms of the research with the interviews.
So let's talk about the overall process, and then we can drill down if you want to. The overall process goes back to the origin and Serby. That I think it's great what my opinions are. I think that, I've worked a very long time in this market in sports television. I think that I have a voice, and I feel like I've put in the time and energy that it's a worthwhile voice. However, I didn't want to write a book from my perspective. I didn't want to write a book where I said to everybody, hey, this is what Todd Ehrlich thinks. You should buy this. A lot of people have opinions, and now, I mean, more than ever, my goodness, you've got social media, you've got podcasts, you've got two all sports radio stations in town, not just one, with people spewing their opinions 24 hours a day. So what I wanted was insight. What I wanted was tangible facts. What I wanted was the people that covered it, the people that were in the locker room during the week, the people that were at the games, the people that are in the locker room post games, the players, the coaches, the broadcasters. I wanted them to share insight. And I know we talked about this earlier, David, but I would end every interview and I would say to people, it's just like sports TV. When you guys get together, you share the same stories. I have the same war stories about my TV days that every time I get together with somebody from WABC, be it Scotty Clark, or WCBS, be it Otis or Skaggs or Overmeyer, or Picks with Moose or Misseri, or WNBC with Spence, who's now at Golf Channel. We have the same stories that we retell and retell and retell. And so I said to these athletes, I said, you have stories that every time you have a reunion or you call up somebody else that you share and laugh about, share them with me. I want to share them with my readers. And some people shared dirt, and none of it made it into the book. It wasn't the book I wanted to write. And I had some things that would have made headlines in the newspaper, I mean, I was on the Fan 4 times, ESPN radio, I mean, Sirius NFL radio, Sirius MLB radio with Ed Randall, as we talked about earlier. I mean, I've beyond blessed with the places that have had me on, to talk about this book. And these stories that were told to me would have gotten me headlines in the paper, would have gotten me a lot more exposure, but it wasn't the book I wanted to write. I wanted to write a book to make people smile. I think the world is a tough enough place, and I just wanted to write bubblegum and rainbows and, you know, this is what happened. And you know what? People went through hardships, but they came out the other side, and I didn't want to spill dirt, and I didn't. And I have those stories. And as Elaine and Jerry said on Seinfeld, they're in the vault, and that's where they're going to stay. And I've never shared them. Not even betraying confidences. People told me because they told me to write in the book, but I wanted to write something that was very, very positive, that was very, very insightful. And so I felt that I got that out of these interviews, and I got fun stories. I mean, the Islanders, they win 19 straight playoff series, right? They win 4 straight Stanley Cups. Neither 19 straight playoff series is never, ever, ever, ever going to be broken on the planet Earth. I'm just telling you right now. But Butchie Goring, who was the key to the first Stanley Cup, wins the
Hmm.
Stanley Cup and goes out and buys himself a Ferrari. He brings it back. to the mausoleum, the Nassau Coliseum, which Hofstra still plays basketball in. They won last night. So brings it to the mausoleum, and Trot sees it. He grabs 9 of his teammates and they lift it up. He goes, it was the size of a go-kart. Puts it on a ledge. He says the wheels were, you could spin them. They were like 6 inches off the ground. And Butchie comes out. Who did this? Who did this? Who put my car up there? And Trotz goes, I don't know, but boy, is he good. McConkey had an unbelievable story where he told me, you know what, Todd, I was a little guy. My whole life, I wanted to be a pilot and play in the NFL. Playing in the NFL was a stretch. So you know what? I became a pilot. I joined the Navy. He goes, after that, I played in the NFL. I wanted to win a Super Bowl. This is my life's dream. I'm standing on the sidelines. I'm looking up at the clock. 3, 2, 1. So it's like an out-of-body experience. He's done it. He's done it. Both of his dreams as a child have been fulfilled. He runs out on the field. In the middle of all this, he looks down. He sees a .357 Magnum lying there. His military training kicks in. He picks it up. He points the gun to the ground, puts his safety on so nobody can get hurt. Security guard comes over and grabs it. Well, he ran out on the field behind Phil Simms for his luck. And the CBS camera was following Phil Simms because he was 21 and 25 in the MVP. And they saw McConkey behind him. So the CBS switchboard, David, you know what a switchboard is? Some of the other folks out there are watching Future, thank you, may not know. But the switchboard lit up like a Christmas tree. Why did McConkey have a gun in his helmet? So they asked him about it at the post-game press conference. He goes, well, you know, I scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl. I helped my team win a championship all in a day's work. I mean, these stories, and I covered that team. I didn't know that story. Some of these stories are priceless. Stefan Matteau says to me, Todd, I got a story I've never shared anyplace. He said, and I'm going to give this to you, and he's been great to me during the Ranger playoff games. He came on, live on our pick shows, and he's really been wonderful to me. And he gave me a lot of time on the phone. So he goes, we win our first Stanley Cup at the Rangers. They had obviously won with Edmonton. He's celebrating his hometown in Eric Desjardins' bar. A fan picks up the Stanley Cup. It snaps in half, the smallest part of it. So what's the fan do? Takes a picture with two halves of the Stanley Cup. Matteau won't tell me for reasons I still can't figure out, and I've asked 1,000 times who this person was, but Bob, he called him, Bob, the welder, said, Stefan, I can fix this. Well, Matteau's like, this is great. I'll take all the help I can get. I'm now the guy with 2 pieces of a Stanley Cup. This is not a good thing. 1:00 in the morning, Bob takes the Stanley Cup to his garage, fixes it, brings it back, tells Stefan, here's the deal. 1 line of welding, this thing would be good for life. I did 4 lines of welding. This thing will never break, ever again. A decade later, he went up to him. He goes, hey, Stefan, I never told you this. I had a raging party in my garage that night. Everybody was drinking out of the Stanley Cup. Anybody I could wake up in town came over. Stefan goes, I think it's a pretty funny story. I said, Matteau, I do too. And I'm proud that I could share that in the book. And that's what I wanted. I wanted funny stories. I wanted interesting stories. I want stories that people would remember and people would share and people would get a kick out of. And hey, did you read in Ehrlich's book? Blah, 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 blah. Or they would share with their son, can you believe this? Or, and that's the book. And that's why I didn't put any of the dirt in. That would have been the focus. And it's just not what I wanted to do. And I didn't.
Well, you succeeded because there's a lot of great stories, humorous stories, just really interesting stories that add to what that great sports moment was.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the choices that you made. Was it Obviously, you made the final decision. Was there input from others? Was it pretty much just your call? And why 20? Why not 10 or 25? What was the decision making as far as why you decided to round it off at 20?
Okay, number one, I'm old. So there was a top 20 countdown. The AP was always the top 20. Everything in life changes. That was the number. 10 would have been a lot easier to write, David, and only like 170 pages instead of 350. So that would have been better as well. Um, but it felt like the right number to me. So that answers that question. Then the process, honestly, it was pretty easy because I had to come up with it in 2003 for my first proposal. So it was already there, and I just started writing. So there we go. And then when I brought Gary on, he goes, "Hey, how'd you come up with it? Do you want to discuss it?" I said, "Can we get this book done?" Because David, writing a book is the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life, bar nothing. I've created sports series. I built the sports department at PIX from 4 people to 12 people. I launched 5 sports series. I launched series at WCBS. I executive produced Tunnel to Towers and helped build that organization, which I'm exceedingly proud of being a very small part of that and producing the national shows on CBS and all of their PSAs. I produced Komen Race for the Cure, and we had to bring out these stories of survival from breast cancer survivors. I've done a lot of hard, powerful, meaningful work in my life. Nothing touched how hard this was. Nothing touched it. So I'm like, "Gary, let's just get it written, and my mom edited the book for me. She was the first pass because, she's an acclaimed, brilliant writer. And she kept going, starting at 20 interviews. "Todd, you've done plenty of interviews. Nobody does this many." "Yeah, here's the thing, Mom. Love you. You don't understand. I need one marquee person for every chapter. This is no joke. And then once you get that, well, they tell part of the story. You need other people to fill in the story or verify that story." So I just kept going and going and going. And quite frankly, the publisher, when they did the deal with us, was going to do one of those soft cover books, very nice, full colored, but soft cover. He My editor was reading and went to bat for me and said, "This book is so good and so well researched, and the amount of interviews, the level of interviews that you have, it needs to be a hardcover book." And so that was exceedingly meaningful. I mean, this is like a real thing. Like I actually wrote a real, David, I can't believe it, but I wrote a real book. It's a little shocking to a guy like me. Um, but so then David and Gary and I finish it. And to answer your question, David, how did we come up with the order? Then we went through and we talked about it. And quite frankly, we left everything almost exactly the same. Aaron Judge made me write a 21st chapter because he hit the 62 home runs and set the AL mark. So, by the way, for your people out there that buy the book, for the price of 20, you're getting 21 chapters. I just want you to know you're getting a bargain. I don't want anyone to take that for granted. My editor wanted to take out Connors and Crixty, and I said, "Absolutely not, under any circumstances." I worked hard on that. And I mean, all these memories I'll remember to the day I die. That was a classic tennis match. So that stayed in there. We had to figure out where to fit in Aaron Judge. So we did that, and then we negotiated. We didn't really move very much of it. It really stayed pretty much as it was in 2003. And then I had to obviously change it a little bit with the helmet catch and when I tweaked the new proposal for Skyhorse Publishing, which again they did, and Sports Publishing Inc., their sports imprint. They did an amazing job, and Jason Katzman did an amazing job as my editor, and he's a huge New York sports fan, and he put love into this book, and it wouldn't have been the same book without him. But like I said, Gary and I, and we just talked through it. I don't know if it was more than a half hour, we just talked through each moment and said, yeah, no, we feel good. We feel good. Hey, should we switch this? Should we switch that? And we either did or didn't. And I said, man, if you at any point until it's printed, want to change anything, I'm wide open because I would much rather, Gary, you tell me on the phone or Jason, um, although Jason gave us obviously full latitude because we're the authors, but I still wanted his input. Then to have David come to me and go, I don't agree with it. I think you should have had Super Bowl three. Oh, am I jumping ahead? And I don't mind that you feel that way, David, but I didn't want it to be the consensus that we didn't have Super Bowl three in the book. I and let's get into that conversation. I want you to lay out your case because it's very, very well thought out. But to me, and what I've told people, and Joe Benigno agrees with you and has very strong opinions about Namath should have been number one as well. What I tell everybody, they're like, I don't want to offend you. Offend me. If you're talking about my book, I am the furthest thing from offended. I am grateful and appreciative, and they're just opinions. This is my opinion. But David, please, because you laid out your opinions for me about why Super Bowl three should be number one. I thought they were very well thought out.
Well, first off, I want to say that, in my opinion, the 20 that Todd have chosen, he's really hit the nail on the head. I don't want to give too much away about the book. That's why you want to get the book, to read the book, to see what they are, and to see these wonderful interviews that are there. But it's very hard to argue with the 20 he's chosen. I think he's really hit the nail on the head. The one discussion that we had prior to this was, number one is the helmet catch in the 2007 Giants Super Bowl win. And certainly that was very historic, not only because of the nature of the comeback win and the incredible catch, and David does the forward to the book, but it also ruined what would have been the perfect season for the Patriots. So certainly that's very, very historic. But behind it is Super Bowl three, which, as Todd had mentioned, wasn't really the most scintillating game. Matter of fact, it was a very boring game, 16-7. Joe Namath kind of, kept the ball on the ground. Matt Snell was really maybe perhaps the best player in the game,
Yeah,
although Namath
not
got the
perhaps,
MVP.
was.
But it was historic because of the fact that it really proved the AFL was as equal to the NFL, and they were gigantic underdogs, the Namath guarantee. There were so many things to that. To
Yep,
this day, people talk about that game. It
yep.
had it was of national proportion in terms of the topic of sport. While the Giant thing, as great as that was really more of like a New York thing. So that was kind of the argument that I had. But there's certainly good reason why the helmet catch is number one.
So it's the 20 greatest moments in New York sports history. My first question to you would be, tell me the quintessential moment in Super Bowl three.
There wasn't really any quintessential moment. Maybe you could argue Johnny Unitas, who was hurt that whole year, came into the game, bad shoulder and all, and he quickly engineered a scoring drive, and then they recovered an onside kick, and all of a sudden it got very scary for the Jets, and a lot of the old NFL people were all excited. Johnny's going to have another great comeback, but it was not to be. But no, there was certainly nothing even remotely that could capture the excitement of the Tyree catch, and just that whole drive, and the fact that Eli was almost tackled and got the pass off, and the comeback at the end when you thought New England had won it when they scored with a few minutes left. You felt that's it. They've done it, and the Giants just in incredible fashion came back and won the game. I mean, it was a remarkable, remarkable story.
So and again, I'm thrilled that anybody talks about the book, and I'm not the least bit sensitive, but the fact that there was a iconic moment in the Giants Super Bowl is one thing. I've got a couple stories I'd like to share about both of them. So in the Jets, the guarantee is what made it special. The merger happened afterwards, but not because that's a misnomer, not
Yes.
because of that win. It was
66, they actually announced the merger. It was already a done deal, but many thought, football experts, the AFL was almost a minor league
yes,
compared to the NFL. In the first two
yes,
Super Bowls, the Packers routed
yes,
the AFL champions. The games weren't even close. They said
no,
the AFL wasn't even the class of the NFL.
no, that's a hundred
And the
percent right.
Jets were 18-point
Yes,
underdogs.
exactly right. So they were 18-point underdogs. For the first time ever, the footballer of the year was going to come from the AFL. It was Joe Namath. So we went down to the Touchdown Club that Thursday night. During practice that day, Weeb Eubank said, we've been watching film. We're all exceedingly confident that we can win this game. He goes, but no bulletin board material. Don't say anything to the press. So Namath shows up at the Touchdown Club with a bunch of his Jet teammates. And his expectation was he would say, Joe Namath, Football of the Year. He'd come up, they'd give him the trophy, he'd wave, he'd sit down, and back to practice he would go the next day. Well, they wanted him to make a speech. So he gets to the microphone, he starts talking. Some guy in the back of the room, Namath called him a wise guy, screams, hey Namath, we're going to kick your bleepity bleep. If this wasn't on a library podcast, I would tell you what he actually told me, but we'll go with bleepity bleep. And Namath said, you know what? You guys have been talking for 2 weeks now. We're going to win the game. I guarantee it. He comes down, he goes to the table where his Jet teammates are, and Snell and the guys are like holding their head like, Joe, what did you do? Didn't we just go over this with coach? He looked at me and goes, well, you think we're going to win, don't you? They said, yep, we do think we're going to win. And so they said, you know what? We got to back them up. They did win 16-7, as you pointed out. And to me, the moment of the game was after the game. It's captured by NFL film, where Namath is running off the field with his number one finger in the air. So I said to him, I said, what was that all about? I said, you told me you were a humble guy, so it was a little bit of anger coming out when you made your guarantee. What was the number one finger about? Not that humble. So he says to me, he goes, I was running off the field, looked up into the stands with all these Jet fans, and they were just going nuts. They were giving me the number one finger, and I just gave it back to them because you know what, Todd? We were number one. And I mean that humbly. Okay. Um,
Mhm.
and what he also told me about being humble was, he said, look, I have three older brothers. They taught me you don't run your mouth. You don't pat yourself on the back. And he said, though, I went to the University of Alabama, Coach Paul Bear Bryant, at our first practice, called all the freshmen together afterwards, said, gentlemen, if you think you can't, you won't. David, if anyone takes anything from our conversation, I want them to take the words of the legendary Coach Paul Bear Bryant. If you think you can't, you won't. And Namath said to me, Todd, that applies to everything in life. Just fight for your limitations. And
Mhm.
so to me, the power of positive thinking is huge. And like you said, after that, the Colts were huge 18-point favorites. Like you said, the Jets went out and won the game, and they won it for the entire AFL. The AFL was legitimate at that point, and that game allowed them to be legitimate. And so, you know what? It was a historic event. It's the number two moment. Let me tell you about the number one moment and why I believe it was number one. So the helmet catch. You already touched upon it. The 2007 Giants, the 2008 Super Bowl was against the New England Patriots. It was supposed to be a coronation. They were 13-point favorites. They were going to be the first ever, there still isn't one, 19-0 team. Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback of all time. He was going up against the Giants. Nobody gave the Giants a chance, right? So Plaxico said, no, we're going to win. And Brady started laughing because he said that the Patriots were only going to score 17 points, so they're going to win 21-17. Brady's like, "Blacks, come on." He said, "We're only going to score 17 points. That's ridiculous." Because they had set a record for scoring points during the year. They were a juggernaut. This was not a game. They were going to steamroll the Giants and make them midgets. Guess what? That didn't happen. David Tyree gave me a great story. He said, "You know what, Todd? During practice that week, the Friday practice, as you know, is supposed to be buttoned up. It's strictly a dress rehearsal for the Super Bowl. They just go through the playbook." He said, "I was dropping everything." Amani Toomer said to me, "Tyree couldn't catch a cold that day." Eli Manning, who's known as more quiet, more stoic, was a leader in that moment. Went up to Tyree after this practice, which Tyree said to me, the worst practice he ever had as an athlete, including Pee Wee football. The worst. Manning walked up to him afterwards and said, "David, I believe in you. You're a gamer." Think about that. I believe in you. You're a gamer. That's what a Super Bowl and I think a Hall of Fame winning quarterback does. Now, did he publicize it? Did anyone know this? No. But that's what he did behind closed doors. Then Eli told me, "Todd, I have to trust my guys. And if you don't trust your guys, you'll hesitate on everything." Think about it, David. If he hesitated on the helmet catch, they wouldn't have, it would have, he never would have thrown it, never would have caught, he never would have been Super Bowl champions. Think about that. Think about what a leader he is. Sean O'Hara told me there was not one, there were two miracles on that play. He goes, "I don't think Eli ever evaded one sack in his life. He evaded like 8 of them." Bob Papa told me on that play, he goes, normally the radio booth is on the sidelines, 40, 50 yard line, 30-yard line, but on the sidelines. Where the Cardinals play and in Phoenix, where the Super Bowl was played, it's in the end zone. He said he started calling the play and Tyree broke off the line wide open. So he starts the call, wide open Tyree. Then Eli's evading it. So he goes, "Tyree's open." Eli throws the ball. He goes, "I still get a lot of grief for that." Because by the time Eli threw it, trust me, he was covered like a blanket. Eli said to me, "My first read was throw it to Tyree. He was open." He goes, "But I stepped up and I was getting grabbed, spun, pushed." He goes, "My offensive line never gave up." He goes, "And I thought, what am I going to do? If I get sacked, it's going to be 4th and 12. That's not good. I just have to throw it away." So I kept trying to stay alive to get enough space to throw it away. All of a sudden, I looked up, I saw Tyree, and I said, "We need to make a play." So he threw it up. He threw it up over the middle, and he said, "It's not a good idea, Todd, because when you throw the ball over the middle, a lot of times it gets deflected. That's when it gets intercepted." He goes, "But I believed in David." He goes, "David comes down with the catch." I went running up to him. I go, "David, don't lie to me." He goes, "Receivers always lie to me." "Did you catch it?" He goes, "Yeah, I caught it." He goes, "All right." And he focused on what's the next play because he goes, "We've got to score a touchdown," obviously, which he did. The Plaques, which put them up. The defense stopped Brady. They win the Super Bowl. So he goes, "In the moment, I never paid attention to and disregarded the helmet part of it." He goes, "I never even saw the play till 3 o'clock that morning. We came home from all the parties and I'm there with my wife and she goes, 'Let's go to sleep. You have a press conference at 7 a.m. You got to be sharp.'" He goes, "I got to watch Sports Center, ESPN. I've got to see the play." He goes, he couldn't believe it. He was beside himself when he finally saw the play. Then David Tyree told me, I said, "Listen, David, I can't imagine a day goes by that somebody doesn't come up to you and talk about the helmet catch." He goes, "That's absolutely true." I said, "Any of the stories stand out at all?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "This guy came up to me and he goes, we're huge Giant fans. We watched the game as a family. And my grandfather was very, very sick. He was on his deathbed and he was perceived to have under a month left to live. The excitement from the helmet catch and the win, he lived another 6 months. That's what this guy told David. And David said to me, look, even the mere perception that something I did athletically, even the perception that that could extend somebody's life is beyond humbling. So for all those reasons, the helmet catch is number one. And for those reasons, I asked David to do the foreword for me for the book.
Those are great stories, really fantastic stories. Most of the 20 are of team achievements, but there are some that are individual achievements and one that even deals with a horse.
Sure.
In the remaining minutes we have left here, I wanted to just bring up one, and that was the 1971 fight between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. They fought three times, but this is the one that people remember the most. And it's got to be incomprehensible to anyone now to wrap their heads around how huge an event that was in 1971. It really transcended the sport of boxing and was truly, I would argue, a global phenomenon. Could you take us back to that?
Yeah, I mean, Frank Sinatra was so desperate to get in, he volunteered to be a photographer for Life magazine. Woody Allen was there, Warren Beatty, the biggest stars on the planet Earth were sitting ringside. It was not a sporting event. It was a phenomenon. Joe Frazier was the champion at the time. Ali had stood up for his rights and was a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War. He was polarizing. He was loved by some for standing up. And as he said, the Viet Cong, nobody did anything to me. So, and he had changed religions. He was a Muslim, and they didn't believe in violence. So he was not going to the war. And he gave up his championship belt. He gave up his livelihood. He gave up financial wealth. He was seen as a pariah by a part of society. Joe Frazier was the working man's champion out of Philadelphia. And he was the champion at the time. And it was just these two iconic boxers were going to collide for the championship. People didn't know whether Ali would ever be able to box again, whether he was going to be sent to jail. Like nobody knew for those years. He didn't just go out with a picket sign and go, I don't believe in the war. He put his freedom on the line for this and gave up his boxing career. So this was not a sporting event. This was a happening. This was an event. It was at the world's most famous arena. It was shown around the world on closed circuit television. And the fight itself, unlike most fights, we'll see what happens tomorrow night, but Tyson and Jake Paul, right? Which is, but Netflix has done a 3-part documentary on it, and it's this big fight. Well, let's see if it lives up to its expectation. This fight was one of the greatest fights in the history of the sweet science. And the other thing is, this is before MMA, and being heavyweight champion of the world, nothing to compare to that. The home run leader, sure. The home run king, sure. But there was nothing that compared to that because it was an individual sport. So golf was not that big. Palmer and Nicklaus, sure, you love them. Sure, you watch the Masters. The U.S. Open with Ashe and Connors and McEnroe, and sure, they were big. They were not the heavyweight champion of the world. And so that's why this was a iconic event.
Hey, Todd, I can't thank you enough for taking time to speak to us tonight. Congratulations on a very successful book, very well written,
Thank
and we
you.
really appreciate once again the time you've given us here tonight. So thank you so much, and I'll turn it back over to
Well,
Jane.
can I share a couple of very quick things?
Sure, please.
Thank you. The company is T-Line TV, TV Line, and tlinetv.com. I just didn't want to correct her in the beginning. The book is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and where all good books are sold. My editor wrote that for me when it came out, and it's still true. There are 50 books, according to Skyhorse, left in the second printing, and they've committed to doing a third printing. So if you and your audience can scoop up those 50 books, I'd be ever so appreciative because going into a third printing in this day and age is really meaningful. And finally, I want to thank you for reading the book, for reaching out to me, for having me on, and for allowing me to share about my passion project and a project that I'm super proud of. And it's just it's a great accomplishment, and being an author and an Amazon best-selling author is really just humbling and hard to wrap my head around. But I'm very, very grateful to the people that bought the book and people like you that have helped publicize it for others.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? We just have thank yous. This was great from Gladys, and Debbie says thank you so much. Okay, if nobody has any questions, so thank you once again to Mr. Todd Ehrlich and to David Jurman for setting all this fun and interesting topic for us and all for all of you. This recording will be on our YouTube link if you want to come back to it at a later date after you've maybe read the book. So it'll be on there in a few days. So I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining us on Thursday evening. Hope you all had a great night, and then we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Night, everyone.
Thank you.